Peace is not found in places where entitlement is like the end game. It's the end all be all. Let me restart. Let me rephrase. Let me try to find different words to explain what it is that's on our minds right now. Because we're all having a conversation here, right? It's not just me. It's all of us trying to figure out what it is that we need to do clearly to heal ourselves and create peace amongst ourselves. So, where do we, or where should we always begin? It's a rhetorical question because I think I've already alluded to it. We should always begin with ourselves. So, if you have a lack of peace, let's say in your family, or a lack of peace in your town or your country, or just a general lack of peace with anybody on the planet, the best place to remedy that unease that you're feeling is to look inside yourself first and root out the unease, or at least give it a voice and really look at it and see, why is it that and more than 9 times out of 10 that peaceful solution that you were looking for is, or was, always inside of you to begin with. So you didn't need a pastor or a church or a government or any other person to really tell you what the truth of that matter was, because you knew it already. Which begs the question why we even have religious institutions and ideologies and gurus and pastors and priests and what and gods that we follow, from Yahweh to Muhammad to Buddha to what? Where did it all go wrong? Well, quite possibly. One of the things that went wrong is that we thought we were right. That these ideals that were taught to us this whole time, we just assumed that they were correct in every way, perfect, not to be questioned. And what I'm suggesting is that everything needs to be questioned. Always. I get a little passionate about this particular subject because in the evangelical fundamentalist Christian church that I kind of grew up with didn't allow for any questions at all, which is it's counterproductive to any intelligence to blindly accept what another says is true because he or she read it in some book that was inspired by God but written by different authors, and so you can't question anything in it. You can't question people's interpretation of it because then you're going against specific denominational values. Fuck it. So it's frustrating. I would imagine. Like, it's not frustrating for me anymore because I don't deal with these things. And if I start seeing that I have to deal with these issues on a more regular basis just because of the people maybe I'm hanging out with at the time, I'm not going to spend more time with them, right? So I'm just choosing differently. But if you're living that life and you find yourself a part of a religious institution, let's say like the evangelical Christians in the United States that are directly linked to the conservative government, that are um, heavily involved in this Zionist movement and firmly believe that the second coming of Christ is just around the corner. And these ideologies are super destructive to humanity or humanity's progress, or because it alienates everybody except for like a very small group of people. And this tactic has been used so many times throughout history for so many different reasons and in varying degrees too. Like, and these groups usually tend to rely heavily on the tactics of fear of not having. Well, if you don't believe this ideology, if you don't join our church, if you don't give 10% of your earnings, if you eat a certain food, if you don't subscribe to certain rights that a woman might have, or do you see how convoluted that this gets, where it sets us up for one being right and the other being wrong, and that's never a good solution to any of our problems. We should always be looking for the win-win-win solution. I have to say that I suppose, like me personally, I do question whether or not we're actually gonna get like better
And these
collectively.
questions
Like,
have
I
been
know that
to the
in
speaker
pockets people are
for 60
starting
years.
to kind
The
of
same
realize that
pattern
we
is being
should,
repeated
you know,
by a young
at the very
generation,
least be nicer
by
to each other and
civilization that is
not be so
recent, like
combative
America.
or whatever. I know that there
The
are
same
changes
question,
happening, but not
with
at the
that
rate
same
that it
intention
really needs to
to
happen,
trap the
in
speaker
as far as
or to really understand the
how
speaker or
quickly
to understand themselves.
greed and pride and hate
And when you have, if
propagate.
you have the
It,
misfortune or the
it,
fortune to have talked
it's
for 60
moving like
years, you know
quickly
all the answers
over that
and all the
event
questions.
horizon where it's
There
like,
is no
oh fuck, man,
difference
I didn't know.
between question and answer. If you understand the question really deeply, the answer is in the question.
Mr. Robert Miller would like to ask a question.
Well, it is not to ask a question, it is just to congratulate you for your statement and to confirm that having lived this organization for almost 40 years and having lived more than 60 years, I've come to the same conclusion as you. We are all being programmed. We are being programmed into a nation, into an ideology, into a religion. And all these are fragmented human beings. It took me 40 years to be in this house, to be deprogrammed from the 2 or 3 nationalities which were imposed on me. Each time I got also a gun to shoot on the other direction. And it is here, after having seen the world in its totality and humanity in its totality, that I have come to the conclusion that it is more important to be a human being than to be a Jew or a Catholic or a Frenchman or a Russian or a white and a black. And in my book, I will not kill under any reason and for any nation or for any religion or for any ideology. This is the conclusion, which is also yours.
Is it a conclusion, sir?
It's
or a actuality?
That is my actuality.
That's not a conclusion.
Ambassador Barish would like to comment.
It's not a comment, it's a question also.
I'm sorry.
It is, as I am, of course, I am not arguing about religions, but I will remind that an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth is not exactly a Christian precept. On the contrary, Christ taught the peaceful ways, care for your fellow human beings, have compassion and love for one another. What I would like to know is how to break this pattern of confrontation among human beings. I'm not talking about states, because human beings are formed by, states are formed by human beings and governments too. They are human beings that rule the countries. How could we break this pattern? How is it that mankind has not been able to practice such loving thoughts as those that Christ brought to us and that were brought also by other religions, as Hinduism and Buddhism? I would like very much to see if we could find a formula, a solution to break that terrible pattern of confrontation and hate, even between families, as Mr. Krishnamurti has pointed out, because it's not just war among nations, it's always that confrontation, rivalry, even among children. You to see that if one is with mama, then the other one wants immediately and push the other one. That pattern, how could we break it? Thank you.
May I answer your question?
Yes, I would love to.
We are programmed like computers. We are Catholics, Protestants, Buddhists, and so on. As Mr. Miller pointed out, we are conditioned. Do we realize or see actually, not theoretically or ideologically, but actually see that we are programmed? Or is it just a casual statement? If you are actually programmed and you realize the consequences of being programmed, one of the consequences being hating or war or separating yourself from others. If one realizes that you are being programmed, pressurized, preached at, and if one really sees that, you abandon it. You don't want a formula for it. Moment you have a formula, then you are caught. Then you become programmed again, because you have your program and the other fellow brings you another program. So what is important is to realize the actuality of being programmed, not intellectually, with all your blood, the energy.
Because of the time element, we may not be able to entertain any more questions. On behalf of the Parliamentary Society and the Movement for a Better World, we would like to thank our honored guest speaker and Robert Mueller and Ambassador Barish, who are the honorary presidents of the society, and all of you who came to attend the lecture today. I have a very simple ceremony before you leave. Mr. Krishnamurti was here last year on the 17th of April, just around the time we had the Parliamentaries Day. And this year, we were very
Look, are you serious? Are we gonna continue with this guy in charge? This guy doesn't fucking care about you. Dude, anybody. Instagram, YouTube, like, is there anybody out there? I got fucking 3 hours in and what? Nothing? No one here? Did you just hear what the Prime Minister of Canada said? He doesn't fucking care about you. I'm mesmerized. Why aren't we angrier? Why are we doing something about this? It's like the fucking weirdest thing. Common sense. I don't know where the common sense is, guys. Anybody? Have you found it? No?
Dialogues on many subjects. Rupert Sheldrake is a biologist whose recently published book proposes that learning in some members of a species affects the species as a whole. Dr. Sheldrake is presently consulting plant physiologist to the International Crops Research Institute in Hyderabad, India. John Hidley is a psychiatrist in private practice who has been associated with the Krishnamurti School in Ojai, California for the past 6 years. In the culture, there are conflicting points of view about the proper approach to dealing with one's own or others' psychological problems. And the underlying principles from which these approaches are drawn are in even greater conflict. Without invoking a narrow or specialized point of view, can the mind, the nature of consciousness, its relationship to human suffering, and the potential for change be understood? These are the issues to be explored in these dialogues.
Is disorder the very nature of the self?
Peace might happen, but I'll just sit back and wait. Well, no, like peace is a
Why do
fucking
you say
action
that?
word,
Why
right?
do you ask that? Is it the nature of the self?
Isn't the
So
self,
it's something you do.
the me, the ego,
Yeah.
whatever word we like to use, isn't that divisive?
Is it just something that you are? Well,
Exclusive?
it was simple as that.
isolating,
If we were
causes
just
this
that,
self-centered activity, which causes so much
well, maybe
disorder in the world, isn't that
quite possibly that's a good
origin, the
that's
beginning
a good
of
way
all
of thinking
disorder?
about it. Maybe we just don't know who we are.
Being, selfish activity.
Yeah,
Right? Most of us
self-centered
don't,
activity
right? So
at all levels.
you got some of us
Yes,
talking
and
on one
certainly
level, and we're
that's the
talking
way in
about
which the patient
things,
comes in.
but we're
He's
making the
concerned about his
assumption that
depression
the other party
or his
knows
fear.
who
His
they
fulfillment,
are.
his joy, his suffering, his
Yes.
agony, and so on.
Well,
It's
that's
all
most
self-centered.
likely an
So,
incorrect
I'm
assumption
asking, if I
because
may,
most
not
people don't. So,
the
like,
self,
even
the
within
beginning
the
of all disorder. The self, I mean, the egotistic attitude towards life, the sense of individual emphasis on the individual, his salvation, his fulfillment, his happiness, his anxiety, and so on and so on.
Well, I don't know that it's the source of the thing. It's certainly the way he experiences it and presents it. He presents it as his.
Yes, but if you go all over the world, it is the same expression. It is the same way of living.
Uh-huh.
They're all living their own personal lives,
Mm-hmm.
unrelated to another. Though they may be married, they may do all kinds of things, but they're really functioning from an isolated center.
And that center, that self,
Yeah.
is the source of the difficulty in the relationship,
In the relationship.
and the difficulty that creates the symptoms.
And I wonder if the psychologists have tackled that problem. That the self is the origin, the beginning of all contradiction, divisive activity, self-centered activity, and so on.
No. I think that the way the psychiatrists and psychologists look at this is that the problem is to have an adequate self.
Adequate self.
Yeah.
Which means what?
Defining
A
normality
self that is functioning
sufficiently.
efficiently,
Yeah.
which means furthering more misery.
Well, I don't feel that the psychiatrists would necessarily agree with you on that last point, that they might feel that a proper or properly organized self could get together with other properly organized selves and make an orderly society.
Yes,
And you're saying, as I understand it, something quite different,
yes.
which is
But
that no self can do it. No structure of the self can make order.
that's right.
Right.
The very nature of the self must intrinsically bring disorder.
Yes, but I'm not sure this will be clear to, how can that be made clear, evident?
Sorry, it seems to me that this is the context is even broader than that of psychology. Because in the world, we have all sorts of things which are not human beings with selves, right? Animals and plants and all the forces of nature and all the stars and so on. Now, we see disorder in nature too. It may not be consciously experienced. And a cat that's suffering, or a lion that's suffering, or a mouse, or even an earthworm that's suffering may not come into a psychiatrist's office and say so. But the fact is that there seems to be disorder and conflict within nature. There are conflicts between forces of nature, inanimate things, earthquakes, and so on. There are conflicts within the animal world. There are even
Everything
conflicts
dies
within the
off. Like
plant
if you only had
world.
one,
Plants
you can't
compete for
replicate.
light, and bigger
Don't-
ones get higher
yeah.
up in the forest, and the smaller ones get shaded.
You don't
out and die.
propagate your species,
There's conflict
then
between
you die
predators
off.
and
Like if
prey.
you have
All
two,
animals live on other
and
plants
one
or animals.
one's barren, then the
There's,
same
every
thing
kind of
happens, right?
conflict. There's disease, there's suffering,
Or they just fight
there's
and they
parasites.
don't
All these things
propagate.
occur in
And then
the
you have
natural world.
two goes
So,
to
Is
three,
the
like,
context
and
of
then
psychological suffering and
then from
disorder
that
something
three
merely
thing,
something to do with the mind, or is it
from
something
three,
to do with
everything-
the whole of nature, the fact that
everything
the world
goes
is full
from
of
three.
separate things?
So
And if
when
we have a
talking
world which is
about the
full of separate
Trinity,
things, and these separate
makes
things are all interacting
some
with each other, that
sense,
there's always going to be conflict in such a world.
right?
So I'm wondering.
And I
is
always
it
had a
clear
hard
that
time with the
there is that
Trinity,
kind
but
of disorder
you know,
in nature, or would we
what I'm
say
going to
that
do
disorder is only
is I feel like this is going,
consciousness?
Yes.
you know,
That is
relatively good.
phenomena that you
I'll
have
try to pick up
described. Are they
where we left
actually
off,
disorder?
and
That's a question.
if I don't, I'll
Or what
course
is the
correct.
difference
And if
between the
anybody
disorder
wants to
and
comment
consciousness
and
and whatever
steer
is
in
going
a
on in
different
nature?
direction,
I saw
let's
the
do
other
that.
night.
But I'm going to take a 5-minute
the
break and then
cheetah
I'll come
chasing
back
deer.
and
Killing
maybe do another 30 minutes or an hour.
Would you consider
And
that disorder?
we'll see where we're at the end.
Well, I would consider that it involves suffering.
Suffering.
All right.
Yes.
Ending live video.
So, are we saying that it is natural
Bye.
for in nature and in human beings to suffer, to go through agonies, to live in disorder?
Yes.
So what do you say to that, sir?
Well, I think that's the way it's looked at by the therapists. To some degree, it's felt that this arises in the course of development, and that some people have it more than others, suffering. Some people are more fortunate in their upbringing, for example, or in their heredity. But it
I'm
is
really sure if I had my mic plugged in, but now I am
may
sure.
not
So
be
now I'm not
necessary,
thinking about it.
in
And
any absolute sense.
we can go on and talk about peace on earth and
That's
whether
not the
that's actually
That's what I would like to.
something we should be asking for
Sheldrick
or
says, it is
asking
It's
about
like that.
in general.
human condition is
Is it
to
something
suffer,
that we
to struggle, to
should
have
attain to,
anxiety,
or is it
pain,
something that
disorder. That's
is
Well, it's
already
certainly-
inside of
it's
us
certainly
somehow,
necessary to have physical suffering.
just waiting to
People
be
get sick, they die,
realized, you know?
and we're wondering whether or not psychological suffering is analogous to that. or
'Cause this
whether there's
peace
something
thing-
intrinsically different about it.
If you think about it,
no, sir.
what's
do
like,
question
what's the root
Seriously,
of peace?
whether human beings
No, when we're
must
talking about
inevitably
peace, what
live
is
in
it?
this state.
What is it that we really want?
everlastingly suffering,
I want peace. I want peace in my
everlastingly
life.
through this
What is it
agony of life.
that
Is
I
that
really
much
want?
right that they should?
Well, peace
It's
is
certainly not desirable that they should.
No.
relate.
If we accept that it's inevitable,
Mhm,
as many people do, then there is no answer to it.
mhm.
But is it inevitable?
Well, physical suffering is inevitable.
Yes. but
Illness,
yes,
death.
sir. Physical suffering, old age,
Yes.
accidents, disease.
Maybe we increase the physical suffering because of our psychological problems.
That's it. That's it. So a mother bearing babies, she goes through terrible time delivering them. Strangely, she forgets that pain. She's the next baby. Another baby. In India, as you know, there are mothers have about 7 or 8 children.